He was 14 years old, and he had simply come home. The stairwell was dim. The landing smelled of stone and cooking fat. He noticed the door across from his own standing slightly open, not unusual, in a building where people knew one another, and he glanced through the gap. What he saw on the kitchen floor of that Valletta apartment stopped him where he stood. He would wash his hands afterward and say nothing, and carry what he had seen for the rest of his life. What happened inside that apartment on the 23rd of August, 1960? Hello everyone. Before we begin, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel and leave a comment below telling us where you are watching from and what time it is there. Your support allows us to continue bringing these stories to light. Now, let us begin. It was Tuesday, the 23rd of August, 1960, in Valletta, the capital city of the island of Malta. August in Malta is not gentle. The heat is a physical presence. It rises from the limestone pavements and collects in the narrow lanes between buildings, and it does not release its hold until well after dusk has settled. On that Tuesday evening, as the temperature began at last to soften, residents across the city had drawn open their shuttered windows. From the streets below rose the ordinary sounds of the hour: a kettle whistling, footsteps on cobblestones, a child's name called from a window above, the slow ringing of a church bell in the distance. Malta was, in 1960, still administered under the authority of the British Crown, though independence was only 4 years away. Valletta itself was, and remains, one of the smallest capital cities in Europe, a place of baroque facades, winding stairwells worn smooth by centuries of footfall, and a community close enough that the business of one household was rarely unknown to the next. In one apartment building off the main road, a family was going about the business of an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. By 7:40 that evening, a police constable would be climbing those stairs. He would not be prepared for what he found. Giga Camilleri did not work outside the home. In the Valletta of 1960, this was not remarkable. Women of the working household managed the domestic interior while their companions held employment elsewhere. Lely Camilleri, her companion, served as a leading marine engineer aboard HMS Angelo, on a posting that brought in a steady wage and kept him from the apartment during the day. They had been together long enough to have a child of their own. Mattis, aged 3, small and largely oblivious to the tensions of the household around him. There were 2 other children. Carmen was 7, slight and watchful, with the particular attentiveness of a child who has learned that it is safer to observe than to speak. And there was Anthony, called Twanny by everyone who knew him, which in a neighbourhood as close as theirs meant nearly everyone on the street. He was 8 years old. He was, by the account of his teachers, a boy of considerable quiet intelligence, diligent at his schoolwork, quick to answer difficult questions, well liked by his classmates, and given to laughter when the occasion allowed. He was slight of frame. His arms, and when he pulled up his sleeves in the warmth of the classroom, showed marks that his teachers noticed and that he, when asked, denied. On the afternoon of the 23rd of August, the apartment was warm and still. Lely had left on an errand. Giga was within. The children were home. From the landing outside, the building would have sounded entirely ordinary: the creak of a shutter, a neighbour's radio, a door pulled closed. Inside, Twanny had been set to work washing the kitchen floor. This was not unusual. It was his task, assigned with regularity, completed in the manner of a child who has learned not to complain. He scrubbed, he swept, he worked. And then, at some point in the long August afternoon, he noticed his stepfather's tool set lying within reach, and he made the kind of small, practical, an entirely innocent decision that a boy of 8 years old might make on any given day. His shoe was worn. He wanted it mended. He picked up the tool. He did not know that Giga was watching. What happened next was not, by the grim arithmetic of that household, out of the ordinary. The testimony gathered in the months that followed would reveal, piece by careful piece, the true nature of daily life in the Camilleri apartment, a picture so at odds with the grieving parents who had stood at the doorway, weeping that the courtroom, when the details were read aloud, fell into a silence of a particular kind, the silence of people who are hearing something they cannot unhear. Twanny had been beaten with regularity. He had been struck with a leather strap, with open hands, with whatever was nearest. He had been bound to the bed, and he had been tied, his wrists fastened behind him, to the iron railing of the balcony, and held there while lit cigarettes were pressed against his skin and extinguished there, one after another, while he could not pull away. A neighbour had heard this and had come to the door and begged Lely to stop. Twanny had been released only when he lost consciousness. Nothing further in the way of intervention was made. Nothing more was thought of it. His teachers had noticed the small circular burns on his forearms and the back of his neck, the bruises at varying stages of colour, the way he flinched when a door was closed too loudly. When asked, he denied everything, pulling his sleeves back into place and looking at the floor. His school lunches, when he had them at all, were frequently mouldy. On other days, there was nothing. He was slight in the manner of a child who has not been consistently fed, and yet he completed his work, and he answered correctly, and he was, his teachers said, a remarkably gentle boy. There had been an incident with some coins, taken from a teacher's desk and from the household, spent on a small pleasure. In a moment of conscience, Twanny had confessed to his teacher. She had responded with patience, and then written to Giga and Lely asking that they not beat him, for he had learned his lesson. They had thanked her. Then they had fastened him to the balcony railing. Now Giga had seen the tool in his hand, and the floor only half washed. She crossed the kitchen toward him. At 7:40 in the evening, a police constable was making his way along the street below, when a man came toward him at a run, his face pale, his words broken apart by sobbing. A boy, the man managed to convey, fallen. He thought the boy might be dead. The constable did not delay. He followed the man to the apartment building and climbed the winding interior staircase, and the building was quiet around him in a way that was different from ordinary quiet, the kind of stillness that settles after something irreversible has occurred. He entered the apartment. The boy was on the kitchen floor. He was 8 years old. He lay curled upon himself, his thin arms drawn up around his head, and in some other circumstance one might have mistaken the posture for sleep. The floor around him was dark with blood. Upon closer examination, the constable understood that the wound to the child's throat was not a wound in the ordinary sense of the word. The head was attached to the body by the narrowest remnants of tissue and sinew. The boy was cold to the touch. He had been dead for some considerable time. At the apartment door stood Giga and Lely Camilleri. They were weeping. They were speaking in rapid, overlapping sentences, each account reinforcing the other. The constable secured the scene, sent immediately for further officers and for a medical examiner, and began to take note of what was before him. By the early hours of morning, the investigation was formally underway. Evidence was gathered from the kitchen, the common hallway, and the stairwell. Items were set aside and catalogued with care. A leather strap, garments retrieved from the washing machine, in the drain of which traces of a substance consistent with blood were subsequently found, and a bread knife, the location and condition of which were sealed for examination. Carmen Aquilina, aged 7, was removed from the apartment. She had been present in the kitchen that afternoon. She had been beneath the bench. She had seen everything, and she had not been asked to speak of it yet. By dawn, all of Valletta knew that a child was dead. Court-appointed medical examiners began their post-mortem examination of Anthony Aquilina's body in the days immediately following his death. What they found, rendered in the careful and restrained language of official medical record, was nevertheless among the most disturbing findings to be entered into evidence in Maltese legal history. The initial examination placed the time of death between 5:30 and 6:30 in the evening of the 23rd of August, and this single finding carried a significance that the court would not overlook. Assistance had not been sought until 7:40. By the most conservative calculation, the boy had been dead for over an hour before anyone called for help. A second autopsy, conducted with greater thoroughness, revealed injuries that the first had not fully accounted for. Deep lacerations were found at the rear of the skull, consistent, in the formal opinion of the examining physician, with repeated blunt force trauma delivered by a heavy implement. The implement most likely responsible was a deadbolt, which had been recovered from the scene. The physician was clear in his conclusion. This beating had been administered in the hours before death. It was not, however, what had killed the boy. What had killed him was the wound to the throat, and here the medical record delivered its most consequential finding, entered with the precision the matter required. At the moment the throat wound was inflicted, the chambers of Anthony Aquilina's heart had not yet emptied. The physician stated his conclusion without qualification. The boy had been alive when his throat was cut. Traces of matter consistent with cerebral tissue were recovered from the kitchen walls, from the floor of the common hallway outside the apartment door, and from the stairwell below, physical evidence that extended the scene of violence well beyond the kitchen floor, and that corroborated, in hard material terms, what the witness testimony would later describe. The evidence was sealed, documented, and forwarded to the examining magistrate. If you are finding this case as compelling and as troubling as we do, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. It is your support that allows us to research and present these cases with the depth and care they deserve. We read every comment below, and we welcome your thoughts. Now, let us return to Valletta. On the 1st of November, 1960, as dusk settled over the limestone city, and the evening bells of Valletta sounded across the rooftops, Giga Camilleri and Lely Camilleri were formally arrested and charged with the willful murder of Anthony Twani Aquilina. Both denied the charge entirely. Giga maintained that she had been away from the apartment the whole of that afternoon, playing tombola down the road. Lely maintained that he had been on an errand. Both were remanded into custody without delay, and the date of the trial was set. The trial of Giga and Lely Camilleri opened on the 25th of February 1961, before the Criminal Court of Malta, and it did not close for 17 days. At that point in Maltese legal history, no trial had lasted longer. The public gallery was filled at every sitting. The newspapers gave it their front pages. The island, small enough that almost everyone knew someone who knew the family, attended to the proceedings in a state of collective disbelief, not because guilt seemed unlikely, but because the details that emerged made the disbelief unavoidable. More than 100 witnesses appeared for the prosecution. Together, their accounts dismantled, stone by stone, the version of events that Giga and Lely had maintained since the night of the 23rd of August. Neighbors described sounds through the walls. Teachers described burns and bruises described by the boy as nothing at all. A child from the landing recalled seeing Twani fall down the stairs that afternoon, his body limp, and stepping over him on her way out of the building. The 14-year-old boy from the same floor, the one who had climbed the stairs and looked through the open door, testified that he had seen Giga carrying Twani through the common area, the boy unresponsive in her arms, that he had later entered the apartment and touched the body, that he had washed his hands and left, saying nothing to the officer he passed on the stairs below because he was afraid. The most devastating testimony came from Carmen Aquilina, now 8 years old. She had sat beneath the kitchen bench. She had watched. She described, on in the measured words of a child who has had some months to understand what she witnessed, each step of what had occurred, the strap, the flight, the return, the knife, the change of clothing, the washing machine turning. Giga told the court she had come home to find Twani covered in blood and had run from the house screaming. Lely told the court he had lifted the boy's head to see whether he still lived, and it had come away in his hands. The jury deliberated. They returned. The verdict was unanimous on both counts. Guilty of the capital murder of Anthony Aquilina. Giga Camilleri was sentenced to death. Lely Camilleri was sentenced to 20 years of hard labor. The court was cleared. The verdict brought no relief. That is the word that appears in one form or another. In nearly every account of public reaction in the days that followed, relief was expected, and it did not come. The machinery of justice had been observed to function. 2 people had been convicted of the murder of an 8-year-old boy. And yet the city of Valletta, close-knit and long-memoried, could not set aside what 17 days of testimony had placed before it. The knowledge of what had been happening, behind a closed door, within the hearing of an ordinary stairwell, while kettles boiled and neighbors passed on the landing, for years. 2 weeks after sentencing, Giga Camilleri's legal counsel submitted an appeal. The appeal succeeded. Her sentence of death was commuted to life imprisonment. The news was received across Malta, with something close to fury. In the event, she served 10 years. The precise circumstances by which her early release was obtained have never been disclosed. The relevant file, if it contains an explanation, has not been made public. Leili Camilleri served the term assigned to him. 33 years after her release, Giga Camilleri gave an interview to a Maltese church newspaper. She had not, by any measure that the interview revealed, altered her position in any particular. She continued to deny all involvement. She was quoted directly, "How can a mother kill her son?" She spoke of Anthony as a martyr and as a saint, and suggested that those in need of divine intercession might pray to him. Her home, the interviewer observed, was filled with his photographs, among them the image that had become, in the decades since his death, the face of the case across Malta. A small boy in a white communion suit, arms standing straight, looking into a camera, solemn in the way that children are solemn when they have been told to stand still for something important. He had no foreknowledge of what was to come. He wore his white suit. He looked at the camera. In later years, a further uncertainty entered the record. Carmen Aquilina, who had sat beneath the bench, who had seen everything, whose testimony had been the keystone of the prosecution's case, stated in a magazine interview that what she had told the court was not true. She suggested, without full elaboration, that the 14-year-old neighbor, the boy who had climbed the stairs, looked through the open door, touched the body, washed his hands, and said nothing, bore a greater responsibility than had been established. Nothing further was ever proven. No charge was brought. The matter was not formally reopened. The apartment where Anthony Twani Aquilina died has not been occupied by another family in the more than 60 years since his death. The landing is quiet. The door stays closed. His photograph endures. The white suit, the steady gaze. The bells of Valletta still ring at evening, as they rang on the 23rd of August, 1960, while a boy washed a floor and no one came in time.